Keanu Reeves arrived at the grand lobby of the $380 million hotel, the very property he co-owned. No security entourage, no assistants carrying folders, no flash of media cameras, just Keanu, in his worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and sneakers. That had seen better days. The lobby was buzzing with mid-morning activity. Guests checking in, bellhops rushing luggage, staff moving between reception desks with practiced efficiency. Yet, in this sea of motion, no one recognized the man standing at the entrance. The receptionist glanced up briefly, her face polite but detached. "Sir, do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone clipped. Keanu's eyes stayed calm, measured. "I don't," he replied softly, yet with authority. A beat of silence. She straightened, hesitated, then spoke firmly. "I'm sorry. You can't enter without a reservation." Keanu nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if he had expected this. He stepped aside, heading toward a seating area. Guests walked past, some curious, most indifferent. A bellboy gave him a quick glance and then returned to his task. The staff whispered among themselves, exchanging subtle glances. None offered a drink, a smile, or even acknowledgement. What no one realized at that moment was chilling. This man, quietly seated in the lobby, owned the majority of the hotel. 53%. The empire they moved through every day, the building they managed as if it belonged to them, was his. For years, he had let them run things without interference. Emails, calls, reports. He stayed away, trusting the people on the ground. But today was different. Today he wasn't there to be served or recognized. He was there to see the truth. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle smirk would reveal who they really were. And in just a few minutes, those who thought they had authority would learn something they could never undo. Most of the hotel staff had never met him in person. They knew his face from headlines, red carpets, and rare photos in magazines, but that was all. To them, he was a distant figure, a name on the corporate reports, a percentage in the shareholder registry. What they didn't know was just how much of this empire he truly controlled. Keanu Reeves owned 53% of the $380 million hotel, making him the majority shareholder. Not just a celebrity who lent his name, not just a figurehead on the company brochure. He built the place from the ground up. Years ago, he had trusted the day-to-day operations entirely to others. He sent emails when necessary, signed off on reports occasionally but rarely visited in person. Calls and meetings were mostly handled by the management team he himself had hired, and the team had gotten comfortable. Too comfortable. They laughed a little too loudly in the boardroom. They made decisions behind closed doors. They assumed ownership meant a signature on a contract, not a person with a pulse, walking quietly down the hall. On that morning, he decided to come unannounced. No warnings, no RSVP, no entourage. Just him, quietly stepping into the space he owned. It wasn't about power. He didn't need to prove himself. He didn't need the receptionists or the concierge to bow or smile. He wanted the truth. He wanted to see how the people he trusted or thought they could trust behaved when confronted by someone they didn't recognize. The lobby, with its polished marble floors, high ceilings, and crystal chandeliers, had a false sense of order. Guests were moving about, unaware that a storm had just entered their midst. Staff were performing routines they thought were unnoticed. Smiles were plastered. Conversations were carefully measured. But Keanu's presence immediately made them uncomfortable. He didn't announce himself. He didn't make demands. He simply observed. Every glance, every whisper, every smirk, he registered it. A young concierge with a flashy tie who thought himself clever rolled his eyes as Keanu passed. A receptionist muttered under her breath, "Just another rich tourist, probably." A manager in the corner laughed at a joke, entirely ignoring the man who had funded the entire building. For the first time in years, the illusions of authority in the hotel began to crack. Keanu took a seat in the waiting area. His eyes scanned the lobby, the staff, the guests, not with anger, not with impatience, but with quiet calculation. He thought about the contracts signed in secret, the whispers of disloyalty among the management team, the hidden plans that had never reached him. And yet, the staff acted as if this empire wasn't his at all, and that was exactly the lesson he had come for. Today would show who treated people with integrity and who treated them with arrogance, who respected others when they believed authority wasn't present, who acted morally when no one was watching, because in just a few minutes, the facade would shatter. And the staff who laughed and whispered behind their hands would see that status, titles, and appearances mean nothing when confronted by the truth. Every smile, every smirk, every whisper would be remembered. Every slight, every dismissal, every subtle sign of disrespect would be accounted for, and the quiet man in the leather jacket, the one they assumed powerless, was watching, waiting, judging. Have you ever noticed how people treat you when they think you don't matter? How do they behave when they believe no one is watching? For Keanu Reeves, this was not a test of ego. It was a test of character. And soon the employees who had assumed they were untouchable would find out exactly who truly held the power. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the lobby, his hands folded on his lap, eyes scanning the room with calm precision. The minutes passed. 1, 2, 3. Staff moved around him, entirely unaware, or perhaps willfully blind, to who he was. A bellboy walked past, carrying luggage, and caught sight of him. His lips curled in a smirk, barely suppressing a chuckle at what he assumed was a wannabe celebrity. He didn't nod. He didn't offer assistance. He didn't even make eye contact. Across the lobby, a receptionist whispered something into her headset, glancing over at him with a raised eyebrow, clearly judging his worn leather jacket and scuffed sneakers. He looks like, I don't know, someone's uncle or a random guest, she muttered under her breath. Behind the glass walls of the management office, the boardroom was alive with subtle arrogance. Executives and managers gathered around a polished mahogany table, their laughter echoing faintly into the lobby. Whiskey glasses caught the light, expensive watches glimmered on their wrists, and their conversations were punctuated with quiet jokes about the people downstairs. 7 minutes passed. No one spoke to him. Not a single word. Not a greeting. Not a glance. Not even the faintest acknowledgement. 15 minutes. The smirks and whispers grew bolder. A manager made a hand gesture to another, pointing subtly in his direction while mouthing words that weren't meant to be overheard. They assumed he couldn't hear. But Keanu Reeves always noticed. Every movement, every subtle sign of disrespect, was recorded silently in his mind. He didn't frown. He didn't scowl. He didn't even tighten his jaw. He simply observed. The staff weren't aware that the man sitting in front of them owned the majority of the empire they managed. 53% of the hotel, the property itself, the brand, the profits, it all belonged to him. And yet, in their arrogance, they treated him like any other guest, like someone with no influence, no power, no authority. A young concierge laughed openly at a phone call, his eyes scanning the lobby for anyone else to notice his mockery. He didn't. Keanu's calm gaze was already locked on him, quiet but undeniable. A bellhop dropped a suitcase, glanced at Keanu and shrugged like it was no big deal, muttering, "Who even is this guy?" Each passing second added weight. Every slight, every judgment, every assumption of invisibility stacked together like bricks. The lobby, with its high ceilings and polished marble, seemed suddenly oppressive. The air was thick with ignorance and arrogance. Keanu didn't need to rise. He didn't need to speak. His silence amplified the disrespect. Each action of the staff, each whispered joke, each dismissive glance only revealed their true character, and This, he thought quietly, was exactly why he had come. He wasn't here to demand attention. He wasn't here to intimidate. He didn't need to. He was here to see the truth. Because arrogance is a mirror, it reflects exactly what someone is hiding. And in just a few moments, everyone in this lobby, everyone in that boardroom, would see how wrong they were to judge someone based on appearance. 17 minutes, 18, 19, and still, no one recognized the quiet, unassuming man in their midst. But Keanu Reeves knew that in just a few minutes, the rules of this space and the illusions of power would be shattered. Has anyone ever treated you as if you were invisible? How do you react when people judge you before knowing your worth? Because in that lobby, arrogance and disrespect were being logged, silently, patiently, and with lethal precision, and the reckoning was about to begin. 17 minutes had passed in the lobby. 17 minutes of whispers, judgmental glances, smirks, and arrogance. Keanu Reeves stood slowly, deliberately, not a sudden movement, not a dramatic gesture, just a calm rise, every inch measured, every step purposeful. He walked past the front desk, past the bellboys and receptionists who assumed they were observing an ordinary guest. He didn't acknowledge them. He didn't speak. His presence alone carried a quiet authority that no one dared challenge, yet. The boardroom doors were closed. Behind them, executives laughed softly, discussing budget cuts, marketing schemes, and petty gossip. Whiskey glasses glimmered in the soft light. Watches sparkled on wrists. They were comfortable. Too comfortable. Confident. Untouchable. Keanu opened the door. The room froze. Conversations cut off mid-laugh. Eyes darted to the entrance. "What are you doing here?" the senior manager barked, standing abruptly, the chair clattering behind him. His voice held shock, confusion, and a faint trace of fear he tried to mask. Keanu didn't answer. He stepped inside with a measured calm. Every eye in the room followed him, some narrowing, some widening. The laughter had vanished. The air had shifted. The invisible balance of power had been flipped. He walked straight to the center of the room, past the glimmering mahogany table, past the luxury laptops and stacks of carefully organized reports. Every footstep echoed softly, but in that silence, it sounded like a drumbeat of inevitability. He placed a single card on the table. No flourish, no announcement, just the card. The room went silent. Executives leaned forward, some squinting, some frozen mid-gesture. Eyes darted to each other, searching for cues, explanations, anything. The card simply read, "Majority owner, 53% shareholder." A gasp from one of the younger managers escaped almost involuntarily. Others stared blankly, as if the room had suddenly lost gravity. A senior executive tried to recover, clearing his throat. That doesn't make sense. You can't." Keanu's calm voice cut through, quiet but firm. "I can. And I do. No anger, no shouting, just certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty." The expressions in the room shifted visibly. The casual arrogance, the smirks, the laughter, they all drained away. The realization hit them like a physical force. They had ignored him. They had mocked him. They had whispered and laughed at someone who owned the building, who controlled the empire, who could undo all their carefully constructed authority in seconds. And now, the truth was undeniable. A junior manager, voice trembling, finally spoke. You're the owner?" Keanu didn't answer. He simply looked around the room. The silence pressed in. Every movement, every smirk, every subtle dismissal from the last 20 minutes replayed in their minds. Some shifted in their seats. Others looked at the floor, ashamed. A bead of sweat appeared on one executive's forehead. The air was thick with tension, regret, and fear. Keanu's eyes, calm and piercing, scanned every face. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need threats. His presence, the weight of truth, was already a judgment. Because in that moment, it wasn't just about the card, it wasn't just about ownership, it was about arrogance meeting accountability, and the reckoning had begun. The boardroom, once full of smug laughter and casual disrespect, now held only silence. Only the quiet knowledge that power, when ignored or mocked, can strike in the most subtle, absolute way. Keanu Reeves hadn't entered to make noise. He hadn't entered to assert dominance theatrically. He entered to reveal reality, to show that those who dismiss others without knowing their worth will eventually face the truth. And the staff, frozen in their chairs, understood immediately. The balance of power had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. How would you react if you suddenly realized the person you ignored could control your entire world? The boardroom was silent. Every face in the room held the same stunned expression: disbelief, fear, and the creeping realization that nothing in this space was as they assumed. Keanu Reeves didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood calm, scanning the room, letting the silence press down. Then the door opened quietly. An assistant stepped in, her hands shaking, clutching a stack of files. They wanted to keep this from you, she stammered, voice barely audible. We found documents, plans, hidden transfers, layoffs, secret sales of parts of the hotel. The papers fell onto the mahogany table, some sliding to the floor. Keanu's eyes moved over them, calm and precise, noting every signature, every note, every date. Executives leaned in, their faces paling further. One document showed a hidden plan to sell a luxury wing of the hotel to a rival company without notifying the majority owner. Another outlined massive layoffs, some affecting staff who had worked there for decades, and none of it had ever reached him. Emails had been erased, approvals faked, signatures forged in careful imitation. The room, once filled with casual arrogance and laughter, now smelled of betrayal. This was all behind your back? A junior manager whispered, voice trembling. Keanu didn't reply immediately. He simply looked at them. The quiet gaze held more weight than any words could. For a moment, everyone in that room saw themselves. As he saw them, small, arrogant, overconfident, and blind to the truth, they had underestimated him, not just as a celebrity, not just as the owner, but as someone who could observe, who could wait, who could measure character in moments like these. You weren't just disrespectful, Keanu finally said, voice low but steady. You weren't just careless. You were planning to betray the people who trusted you and the company we built together. Heads dropped. Eyes avoided his gaze. Whispers stopped mid-word. The reality was unbearable. Keanu Reeves, the quiet man in the leather jacket, the one they thought powerless, now held absolute authority over them, and they knew it. The assistant, still trembling, whispered, hundreds of jobs, hundreds of families, everything at risk. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. Every slight, every mockery, every arrogance-laden smirk from the last 20 minutes replayed in his mind. And now, the truth had come out. It wasn't just about being kicked out in the lobby. It wasn't about appearances. It was about character, and they had failed. Because arrogance always reveals itself. It hides behind laughter, casual gestures, confidence, but it is unmistakable when observed quietly by someone who matters. Keanu reached for the files, straightened them, and laid them neatly on the table. Every signature, every forged approval, every secret note was evidence of their betrayal. This isn't about revenge, he said finally, voice firm but calm. It's about accountability, integrity, and the consequences of forgetting that. Respect and honesty matter more than titles or clothes or appearances. Heads nodded slightly, though shame and fear still clung like shadows. The room understood now, truly understood, that the power they assumed they had was an illusion. Their actions had been logged silently, carefully, and every misstep would, be remembered. Keanu Reeves didn't need theatrics. He didn't need anger. The documents, the evidence, the cold realization of betrayal, and the quiet authority in his gaze spoke louder than words ever could. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? How would you react if you discovered someone was secretly working against you while mocking your authority? Comment below and share your story. Like if integrity matters more than titles. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that arrogance always gets exposed. The room was silent, not a whisper, not a cough, not even the faintest shuffle. Keanu Reeves stood in the center of the boardroom, calm, unhurried, letting the weight of the truth settle over everyone like a heavy fog. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a hand on the table. He didn't need to. Every eye was on him. Every person acutely aware that the balance of power had shifted completely. For 20 minutes he had silently observed arrogance, disrespect, and betrayal. Now the time for observation had ended. "I didn't come here to be recognized," Keanu said, voice low, steady, deliberate. "I didn't come here to command attention. I came to see how you treat people you think don't matter. And now, I see everything." A shuffle from the corner of the room. A nervous manager shifted in his seat. Another executive swallowed hard, trying to mask fear behind a forced smile. Keanu's gaze scanned each face slowly, piercing, measuring. Each smirk, each whisper, each act of arrogance from the past 20 minutes replayed in his mind. He remembered every glance, every slight, every act of casual dismissal. "You," he said, pointing toward the senior manager who had rolled his eyes in the lobby, "thought you could mock and ignore me. You." He turned to the executive who laughed at a private joke. "Thought your schemes would remain hidden. And you," his gaze swept across the room, "thought respect was optional." Every eye was locked on him now. No one moved. "I came here not to punish, but to see truth," he continued. "And the truth is clear. Arrogance and betrayal have no place in this company. Respect is not optional. Loyalty is not optional. Integrity is not optional." He paused. The silence pressed against every corner of the room, thick and suffocating. "You're all terminated. Effective immediately." The words landed like a hammer strike. For a fraction of a second, disbelief held them frozen, then panic began to spread. Chairs scraped. Some executives fumbled for phones, but none dared move toward him. Keanu didn't flinch. He simply waited, letting the authority in his silence settle like concrete. From the hallway, security quietly entered, their presence deliberate but unobtrusive. The executives' faces paled as the reality set in. In 20 minutes, the people who had laughed at him in the lobby, the people who had assumed they were untouchable, the people who had plotted and schemed behind his back, all lost their perceived power in an instant. Some tried to justify themselves, to beg, to explain. Their voices faltered under the weight of evidence, the clear authority, and the cold, calm presence of the man they had underestimated. Keanu walked past them slowly, each step deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply let the moment speak. Every slight, every disrespect, every act of betrayal had consequences, and they were now facing them. "You see," he said softly, almost to himself, "real power is not in titles. It's not in arrogance. It's not in appearances. Real power is quiet, measured, and undeniable when the truth is revealed." Heads bowed. Some sat in shock. Others stared at the floor ashamed. Fear and respect mingled in the same heavy air. In that moment, the entire boardroom understood something fundamental. The balance of power was never about appearances or titles. It was about character. And the one they had mocked, the one they had underestimated, was the only person who had both. Would you have had the courage to make this decision if you were in Keanu's place? How would you handle people who betray trust in your organization? Comment below your thoughts. Like if you believe respect and integrity should always be non-negotiable. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that arrogance always comes with consequences. The boardroom was quiet. Too quiet. For the first time in decades, the staff and executives fully grasped the weight of the silence. Every smirk, every whispered joke, every act of arrogance logged and remembered. And now, the consequences had fallen. Keanu Reeves stood calmly in the center, surveying the room. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. The moment wasn't about him. It was about truth. Later, as the remaining employees gathered in the larger hall, the tension was almost tangible. Whispers of disbelief passed through the room. Some still trembled, unsure whether the termination decision might extend further. Others simply stared, processing the humbling lesson they had just witnessed. Keanu didn't speak immediately. He let the weight of the moment settle, letting everyone feel the enormity of their assumptions and misjudgments. Finally, he spoke, voice steady, calm, but resonant. Your jobs are safe. This company will continue, and it will continue on the principle that arrogance, disrespect, and betrayal will never be tolerated. The staff exhaled, a wave of relief sweeping across the room. Some faces were wet with tears. Some hearts were pounding, still heavy with the weight of fear and realization. But slowly, the energy shifted. This company, Keanu continued, will never measure people by clothing, by titles, by appearances, or by assumptions about power. Character is revealed not in boardroom meetings or spreadsheets, but in how we treat people we believe cannot affect us. He paused, letting the words sink in. Every employee in the room understood that lesson intimately. Those who had underestimated him, dismissed him, or mocked him now recognized the quiet authority of true power. Arrogance had been exposed. Betrayal had been confronted. And in that moment, respect became the currency of the organization. Some managers who had laughed and whispered behind his back just minutes earlier were now in tears. They understood that their behavior, however small, had been recorded, not in a ledger, but in the eyes and memory of someone who truly mattered. Keanu didn't dwell on punishment. He didn't linger in the fear he had created. Instead, he offered a vision. A company thrives not on hierarchy, not on appearances, not on who sits at which desk. It thrives on integrity, honesty, and respect. For everyone, always. The room shifted again, this time in understanding. The fear transformed into a commitment. They knew what had to change. They knew that moving forward, respect and accountability would guide every interaction, every decision, every moment in that hotel. For Keanu Reeves, this was never about ego. It was about ensuring that the people who worked in his company understood what true character looks like, and that arrogance, no matter how subtle, would always reveal itself. He glanced around one last time, noting the expressions of relief, shame, and recognition on their faces. The lesson had been learned, the reckoning had been delivered, and the company could now rebuild stronger, with respect at its foundation. Remember this, he said softly. Power without humility is empty. Respect without sincerity is meaningless. And arrogance always finds itself exposed. The employees nodded silently, internalizing every word. They understood that the man in the worn leather jacket and faded sneakers, once underestimated, was the measure of integrity in their organization. Do you think Keanu made the right decision? Should the executives have faced harsher consequences? Comment below and tell us what you would do in his place. Like if respect should be unconditional. Share this with someone who needs this reminder that arrogance always reveals itself and that integrity always wins.